Well, good day again, guys. Today I want to just start talking about being celibate for the kingdom of God. This is a way of radically following Jesus, being celibate as he was celibate. Now, celibacy is a gift from God. Paul talks about that. Paul was deliberately celibate. He said, that's a gift I've received. He says in 1 Corinthians 7:7, he says, not everybody receives that gift, but I've received that gift. You see, it's actually an extraordinary charism. Charisms are like supernatural graces, enabling us to do what otherwise we would not be naturally able to do. It's not a natural thing as such to be celibate, right? Naturally you sort of get married and have children, etc. But you're given a supernatural gift that enables you to really choose this particular way of life and depend on the grace of God to live it out fully. And it's as an expression of love. Again, it's like that you've been captured by the love of God in such a way that you want to radically love him and be for him alone. And so that's the celibate life. So we do this like in imitation of Jesus, because Jesus was not accidentally celibate. He was celibate for the kingdom of God because that was the most appropriate way he could really express his love for the Father and his love for the kingdom and his desire to see the kingdom come about. It was a deliberate choice. So it's like it's radically new, because in the Old Testament, celibacy was not held up. It was really marriage and family life that was held up, and rightly so, of course. It's a very important way of life. But celibacy for the kingdom is like a radical innovation that Jesus has brought by living it himself and inviting others into this way of life. And when the apostles were sort of talking about it with him, in Matthew 19, Jesus says, it's not everybody who can accept what I have said about celibacy, but only those to whom it is granted. It's only those whom it's granted. It's a gift, right? And he says, there are eunuchs born that way from their mother's womb. There are eunuchs made so by men. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves that way for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. So what's a eunuch? A eunuch is someone who has actually lost his... he's been... a eunuch, he doesn't have his sexual organs, right? And that's what the definition of eunuchs. This is rather confronting language by Jesus, right? And I'm sure that people found it somewhat hard to receive, really, when he spoke this way. Like it's almost offensive language, really. But he's talking about himself being a eunuch for the kingdom, you see. Not that he had what was necessary, like physically he had his sexual organs, but but he was saying that this is the way that I've chosen. So there are eunuchs, he says, who are born that way, like because they were born with an physical impediment, right? But then he says there are eunuchs who are made that way by men, because they used to actually castrate guys who were going to sort of look after harems, right? Because so they wouldn't play around with the women. They actually castrated. That's why they were eunuchs. So he says the eunuchs that are made that way by men, you see. And then there are eunuchs who choose to be for the kingdom of God. So it's really strong language, isn't it? And he's referring to himself first and those who follow him in this regard, right? So it's radically new. It's quite strong. And so it sort of like expresses that the passionate givenness for the kingdom of God. Celibacy expresses that. It's like the existential urgency of the kingdom. That the kingdom, it's not that you can become celibate by entering the kingdom, of course. People who enter the kingdom don't have to become celibate. But it's because the kingdom of God is so taken hold of you that there's a depth to your appreciation of the love of God, and you just want to be a eunuch for the kingdom. That is, you want to be given to God to that degree, and so that he becomes your sole love, and you're not focused on marriage and family life for yourself. So it's an existential urgency. It's a sort of and I think that's what Jesus experienced. The kingdom of God he experienced was so urgent, he's so passionately about it, that really he had to be celibate in that regard, right? So you don't choose celibacy to enter the kingdom, but rather the kingdom enters you and renders you unmarriageable, right? In that sense, not that you could obviously get married because you'll have the natural desire for marriage, the equipment to be able to marry, etc. But you radically belong to the Lord now, and you know yourself in such a way that this has taken hold of your heart in such a way that you know that you'll do violence to your own person to go and get married, whatever. It's because there's a new thing that's happened within you. Now, this happens over time. It's not immediate. It's not sort of like, one day I want to get married, next day I want to be celibate. No, it happens over time. But the Lord starts to claim your heart in a particular way. We know when we talk about consecration, he consecrates you to himself. He claims you as his very own, right? And so it also can be connected to our mission because it expresses the urgency of the spreading of the kingdom of God, right? The urgency of being radically available for mission and the preaching the good news to the ends of the earth. So, you can just up in a moment, you don't have to worry about family and children or anything. You can be available for mission, right? And Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 7:32. He's talking about himself and the values of the celibate life. And he says to the people, he says, I would like to see you free from all worry. An unmarried man can devote himself to the Lord's affairs. All he need worry about is pleasing the Lord. But a married man has to bother about the world's affairs and devote himself to pleasing his wife. He's torn two ways. You see, so he's saying that it expresses an undivided heart. That I'm not having to worry about my wife, my children. As good as that is for a married man, of course, it's not a negative thing about marriage. It's just expressing the urgency of the kingdom that takes hold of us. And when he says looking after the Lord's affairs, he's not talking about sort of just the administration of a parish or something like that. He's rather talking about the proclamation of the gospel. Because Paul was such that he knew that he was given to God in such a way to proclaim the gospel that he didn't have the time to be spending with wife and children. He was given for another purpose, right? And so that's what he's talking about, the Lord's affairs, the salvation of souls, really. And he's radically given for that purpose. And so, consequently, there will be some in the church who will have this call upon them for a celibate life. So that the sole preoccupation is the proclamation of the gospel and praying for others who don't yet know the love of God, right? So that's something of the celibate life. It's a sign of the kingdom to come too, because the kingdom is yet to come, and when it does come fully, when we're all together in heaven, there will be no marriage at that point. See, so celibacy already, as it were, anticipates the final state that will be together in heaven. Remember when that question was asked of Jesus in Matthew 22. Remember they came up and they asked Jesus about this whole issue of marriage in the kingdom. because you see, the Sadducees who denied the resurrection, they said, Master, Moses said that if a man dies childless, his brother is to marry the widow, his sister-in-law, to raise children for his brother. Now, we had a case involving 7 brothers. The first married and then died without children, leaving his wife to his brother. The same thing happened, the second, the third, and so on. Now, at the resurrection, so in other words, this woman ends up having married, 7 or so guys, right? So which one will be his husband in heaven, her husband in heaven? So that's the question, So someone has married a couple of times, you see. Which one's going to be the husband in heaven? And Jesus says, you don't understand. There's no marriage in heaven. It's been superseded in heaven. Marriage has been superseded. For at the resurrection, he says, men and women do not marry. They're like angels in heaven. So you see, that the celibate life then, it anticipates this, the urgency of the kingdom coming about. So it's a more direct sign of the kingdom of God then. It's more like the definitive state which we're all heading towards. So because celibacy can't really attain its full meaning from things of this world. It's not just, this is the best way that we've got to sort of like use our energies or whatever. It really gets its depth of meaning from the fact that ultimately we're all going to be caught up together in the communion of saints, and the marriage will be superseded. But it's important also to say that celibacy and marriage go together in the life of the church. That marriage is a beautiful way of holiness, and so celibacy is a way of holiness as well. The two go together and they're mutually interdependent, and they need to support one another. So in pitching for celibacy, I'm not in any way wanting to downplay marriage. Marriage is a beautiful way of holiness that men and women are called to, and most men and women are meant to be married. And I say to guys, look, if you're considering what the Lord wants for you in your life, well, just go to him and say, Lord, I'm available to you to be celibate. And if you don't get a sense of peace about that, then maybe he's wanting you to do the natural thing and get married. But a lot of guys don't make themselves available to become celibate because they're too scared. So it's like that. And the Lord only takes those few, relatively few, who are cut out to be celibate for the kingdom and designed that way. But by his purpose from the very beginning, he's consecrated you to himself, right? So if you're consecrated to the Lord to be celibate, that's fantastic. It's a wonderful gift. So it's a marriage to the Lord, really, is that we can use the image of a marriage. Like celibacy isn't like an abstract ideal. You're not giving yourself to some ideal, but rather you're giving yourself to a person. So it's a marriage to a person, and it's the Lord, right? So it's a permanent, loving relationship with the Lord, really. And so you're renouncing the natural married state out of love for the Lord, and to enter into the celibate state is to enter into a deeper relationship with the Lord of intimacy that can only come in him, right? So in natural marriage, it's like a one flesh union, but in a spiritual marriage, it's like a marriage in the spirit, right, with the Lord. And so we to give, as 1 Corinthians 7:35 says, our undivided attention to the Lord, really. And a passionate concern is not for a cause or for an ideal or something like that, but our passionate concern is for the Lord himself, right? That he is the love of our lives. He's the joy of our lives. And so a celibate will always be going aside, spending time with Jesus, because he's your partner in marriage, if you like. He's your beloved. He's claimed you for himself, right? So we embrace him as our lasting treasure, and he's the joy of our lives. And so I remember one of our guys when he finally made his perpetual vows, and in his speech later he says, "Now I am taken," You know how a married man, can be approached by a woman or something. He says, "No, I'm taken already. I'm sorry." Well, I say that too. I'm taken already. I'm taken by the Lord. I'm married to the Lord now, and that's it. Vinny, I'm married to the Lord. It's interesting. I remember a woman on a train. This is when I was a young seminarian. Before the Missionaries of God's Love, I was sort of still struggling a bit with celibacy, etc. And I was on a train, and she was sitting next to me. She was obviously a very worldly woman, because you could just, how you can tell a worldly woman. And and so we got talking. And she said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm actually trained to be a priest." And she looked at me up and down like only a worldly woman can look at you. And I was feeling uncomfortable. And then she said, "I don't believe any man can live without love." Now, see, she took that because I was a celibate, that I was living without love, you see. She was talking about sex. For her, love was sex, And I went to water. I didn't know how to answer at all. I went, oh, la, la, la. But later on, I thought about it. And I thought, my whole life's about love. Not what she's talking about. She's just talking about sex. But my life's about love, She got it wrong, you see. She was expressing the world's way of seeing things, and and you might say, "Oh, what a waste, you're such a handsome young man." Well, I used to be. But it's a lavish gift to the Lord. Remember when the woman, Mary of Bethany, came in with an alabaster jar of ointment that was worth like a whole year's wages. And she just came in, she just lavishly broke open the jar and anointed Jesus with it. And Judas said, "What a waste!" Judas, what a waste, you see. That should have been money used for other purposes. What a waste. And Jesus, though, he affirmed her, saying this will be remembered for a century, forever, this act of love that she's made here now. Because it's an extravagant act, it's a lavish act, you see. And that's when people say about us when we go to become celibate, "Oh, what a waste." I remember one of the brothers came back from Goulburn, where I used to go to school, in secondary school, and we used to have dances with the girls there in a neighbouring school. There's one girl who must have taken quite a liking to me, because the brother met her, and this is much later in life, and she said, "Oh, so I remember Kenny Barker. Oh, he was very handsome, but he went off to become a priest. What a waste." And what a waste, she said. What a waste of good, And I thought that was so funny, because she had not understood, It's a Judas way of looking at things, the extravagant gift of giving myself fully to the Lord and rejoicing in who he is in my life. And yes, of course, that means letting go of marriage and family life, but doing it joyfully and freely, because it's an extravagant gift to the Lord himself, the gift of my sexuality. That's what I offer to him, my whole self and all that I am. I hold nothing back at all, right? And so to be celibate is not to be feeling like, somehow you're second rate, or you scornfully looked on by others or something, you missed out on something. No, to be celibate is to be joyful in the Lord, and to be free and in love. And it's a life lived richly in love of God, and lavishly pouring oneself out in love of him for the sake of the kingdom. Bless his name.